My wife's affair partner is suing me for defamation after I caught them together and posted the video online, but she's begging me not to reveal her secret involvement with my business. It all started with a gut feeling, the kind that gnaws at you, urging you to dig deeper, to see what's hiding beneath the surface. My wife, Laura, 34F, and I, 36M, had been together for over a decade, and I thought we had a solid marriage. We shared everything, or so I thought. I'd noticed her pulling away recently, acting distant, spending late nights out with vague excuses about work events or catching up with friends. My instincts told me something was off, but I tried to brush it aside, chalking it up to stress or maybe a rough patch. One night, as I was scrolling through our shared cloud account, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. It was a video clip from our home security system, recorded from the guest bedroom. In the clip, Laura was with another man, someone I didn't recognize. They were far too comfortable, too intimate. I watched in disbelief as she kissed him, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. My heart sank, and a surge of anger coursed through me. This was the proof I didn't want but couldn't ignore. I confronted her that night, the evidence right there in my hand. At first, she tried to deny it, stammering, her face pale with shock. But the video didn't lie. After a few minutes, her denial turned into desperate pleading, begging me to understand, to give her a chance to explain. She told me it was a mistake, that she'd felt lonely, that it was just a brief lapse in judgment. I couldn't believe the excuses spilling out of her mouth. I felt like my world was crumbling right before my eyes. As we argued, something snapped inside me. I was done playing the understanding husband. I'd given her everything, and she repaid me with betrayal. Fueled by anger, I did something I'd never done before. I took the video, uploaded it online, and shared it with a select group of friends and family. I wanted them to know the truth, to see what she'd done to me, to our marriage. The video quickly spread beyond my small circle, and it wasn't long before her affair partner, Tom, 39M, found out. The next thing I knew, I was served with a lawsuit. Tom was suing me for defamation, claiming that the video had caused him irreparable damage and cost him his job. He argued that I had no right to invade his privacy, and now he was demanding compensation. It felt like a sick joke. He had the audacity to sue me after wrecking my marriage. But that wasn't the worst part. Laura, seemingly out of guilt or fear, started begging me to drop the entire ordeal. She confessed that if the lawsuit went to court, her other involvement would likely come to light. It turns out she'd been working with my business competitors behind my back, feeding them confidential information about my company. She claimed she was coerced, but I could see the truth. She was trying to protect herself, desperate to avoid any consequences. I had trusted her with everything, and here she was betraying not just our marriage but the very livelihood I'd built from the ground up. As the weight of it all bore down on me, I realized I had a decision to make. I could settle quietly and let her keep her secrets, or I could expose everything, consequences be damned. The morning after receiving the lawsuit notice, I sat in my office, staring at the papers with a mix of disbelief and rage. My attorney, a sharp woman named Allison, 45F, came over to discuss our options. She raised an eyebrow as she read through the claims Tom was making, and I could see the spark of a challenge in her eyes. She told me she'd handled cases like this before, but there was something unusual about the boldness of Tom's demands. It's almost as if he expects you to cave, she said, her tone laced with skepticism. He's probably banking on your guilt or fear to keep you quiet. That comment gave me pause. Was there more at stake here? I decided right then that I wouldn't back down. If Tom wanted to drag me into court, I'd meet him there. I was tired of being the one to compromise, to keep secrets, to suffer in silence. This time, I was going to fight back, and I wanted every dirty detail to come to light. If he and Laura had nothing to hide, they wouldn't be so desperate to keep me from talking. The days turned into weeks as we prepared for the legal showdown. My lawyer subpoenaed everything: phone records, email chains, any evidence that could show the extent of their relationship. What we found made my stomach turn. Tom and Laura had been seeing each other for over a year, sneaking around and planning their little rendezvous during times I thought she was at work. She'd lied effortlessly, weaving deception into every facet of our life. But what we uncovered next was even worse. In one set of emails, we found communication between Laura and my competitors. She'd been feeding them information about my business plans, tipping them off about upcoming projects, even revealing my bids on contracts. I felt a wave of betrayal that went deeper than her infidelity. She hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she'd jeopardized the future of my company. I built this business from scratch, sacrificing countless hours and pouring everything I had into making it a success. And she'd been selling me out, piece by piece, for reasons I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Fueled by this new evidence, Allison and I built a counterclaim. We were going to expose the affair, the corporate espionage, everything. I knew it would mean public humiliation, not just for Laura and Tom, but for myself as well. But at this point, I didn't care. I wanted justice, and I was willing to pay any price to get it. A few days before the court hearing, Laura showed up at my office unannounced. She looked desperate, her eyes filled with panic as she pleaded with me to stop. "You don't understand, James," she said, her voice trembling. "If you go through with this, you'll ruin everything. We can fix this without dragging each other through the mud. Think of our kids, of the life we built. This doesn't have to end like this." I laughed bitterly, the anger bubbling up as I looked at her, realizing just how deep her betrayal ran. "You're worried about our life now?" I asked, incredulous. "You threw that away the moment you crawled into bed with him. You're only here because you're afraid of what's going to happen to you if this all comes out. Don't pretend this is about anything else." Her face crumbled, and she tried a different tactic, resorting to threats. She warned me that if I didn't back down, she'd make sure I'd lose everything. "Tom has connections, James," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "He's not someone you want to mess with. He'll ruin you if you don't drop this. Is that what you really want?" Her words didn't scare me. They only fueled my determination. I'd come too far to back down now. I was ready to face whatever fallout would come from this mess, because I knew that I couldn't live with myself if I just let her get away with it. As I watched her walk out of my office, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The life I'd known was gone, and there was no going back. But I was okay with that. I'd lost everything I thought mattered, but I still had my dignity. And now I was going to take back what little power I had left, no matter the cost. The morning of the court date arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with Allison by my side. Tom was there, smirking with a confidence that made me want to punch him in the face. Laura sat beside him, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The proceedings began, and I could feel the weight of every eye in the room as our lawyers laid out the evidence, piece by painful piece. I could see Laura's face fall with every damning piece of evidence, the realization dawning on her that I wasn't going to cave, that I was ready to go down swinging. And when it was my turn to testify, I looked her straight in the eye and told the truth, every brutal, heart-wrenching detail. I watched as the image of our life together shattered before everyone in the room, as the lies she'd woven unraveled in front of her eyes. I knew there was no victory to be had in that courtroom, no satisfaction that could heal the wounds she'd left behind. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of closure. I had fought for my dignity, for my self-respect, and I knew that I could walk away from this with my head held high. The courtroom testimony was only the beginning. In the days that followed, it felt as if I'd walked into a full-scale war. Tom and Laura weren't going to let me get away with publicly exposing their affair and her betrayal. I'd hoped that laying everything out in court would make them back off, but instead, it only seemed to fan the flames. The first sign of escalation came in the form of an unexpected visit from Child Services. Someone had filed a report, alleging that I was an unfit father, that I had anger issues, and that I'd been neglecting our children. The accusations were baseless, but I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly where they came from. Laura had always been cunning, but this was a new low, even for her. She was trying to get the upper hand by attacking me where it hurt most, our kids. I cooperated fully with Child Services, opening my home and providing evidence that refuted every false claim. I could see the worry on my children's faces as the investigator walked through our house, asking questions and taking notes. I tried to reassure them, but I couldn't hide the tension. I'd already lost so much, I couldn't bear the thought of losing them too. While I was dealing with child services, Tom's lawsuit for defamation ramped up. He wanted a hefty settlement, claiming that my public accusations had damaged his reputation and hurt his business. It was laughable. This was the same man who'd shamelessly had an affair with my wife and used her to get insider information on my business. But Tom's attorney was ruthless, pushing every angle, trying to paint me as a bitter, vengeful man who'd gone too far. Allison warned me that this lawsuit was more dangerous than I realized. If I lost, it wouldn't just mean a financial blow. It would mean Tom and Laura could parade around as the victims, while I'd be left branded as the villain in this mess. She advised me to settle, to consider giving them what they wanted so we could end this nightmare, but I refused. They'd taken enough from me already. Giving in would be like handing them the victory they didn't deserve. Then came the messages. Someone had leaked my personal phone number and email online, and I started receiving anonymous texts and emails full of threats and accusations. Some of them were from strangers who'd bought into the sob story that Laura and Tom were selling. Others were from people pretending to know me, claiming they'd expose me for things I hadn't done. One night, I received a particularly disturbing message. A photo of my house taken from the street with a message that read, "Back off, or you'll regret it." The threats weren't just directed at me. A few days later, I got a message from one of my employees. She'd been approached by someone claiming to be a concerned citizen, asking about my character, trying to dig up dirt on me. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Tom and Laura were pulling strings behind the scenes, trying to ruin me both personally and professionally. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, my life spiraling out of control with no end in sight. As the pressure mounted, I found myself leaning heavily on my support network. My sister Jenna had always been my rock, but even she looked worried as I recounted the latest developments. "James, you need to be careful," she warned. "They're obviously not above playing dirty. I'm worried about you and the kids. Is there any way to de-escalate this?" I wished I had an answer for her, but I didn't. I couldn't just roll over and let Tom and Laura win. They'd tried to destroy my life, and now they were trying to take my kids, my business, and my reputation. I wasn't about to let them walk away unscathed. I resolved to fight back with everything I had. With Allison's help, I began building a new strategy. She filed a counterclaim against Tom, accusing him of corporate espionage and breach of privacy. We subpoenaed his financial records, hoping to find evidence that he'd been using Laura's insider knowledge to undercut my business deals. I knew it was a long shot, but it was my last chance to prove that I wasn't just another bitter ex. I wanted the world to see who Tom and Laura really were: manipulative, deceitful, and willing to destroy anyone who got in their way. As we dug deeper, we discovered something unexpected. Tom's financial records showed a series of large withdrawals and wire transfers over the past few years. The transactions didn't align with any of his business expenses, and they seemed suspiciously personal in nature. With further investigation, we found that he'd been paying off several individuals, including a private investigator. The dates of these payments matched up with key moments in my marriage to Laura, the times when she'd suddenly become distant, secretive, or overly paranoid about my activities. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Tom hadn't just been sleeping with my wife, he'd been actively undermining my life for years. He'd been feeding Laura lies, fueling her insecurities, and using her to gather information on me. And now he was trying to erase me entirely, to paint me as the villain while he played the part of the misunderstood lover. I showed the evidence to Allison, who was visibly shaken. "This changes everything," she said. "We can take this to the judge, use it to argue that he's not only lied about the affair, but actively sought to ruin your life. This could shift the entire case in our favor." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could turn the tide. We went to court with our findings, presenting the judge with proof of Tom's payments, his coordination with Laura, and his attempts to manipulate the situation to his advantage. The judge agreed to consider the new evidence, postponing the lawsuit and ordering a thorough investigation into Tom's actions. As we left the courthouse that day, Allison turned to me with a determined look. "James, you got them on the ropes. This is our chance to expose the whole rotten mess. But you need to be prepared. They're not going to take this lying down." She was right. I knew that Laura and Tom wouldn't back off quietly. They'd thrown everything they had at me, and now that they were cornered, I expected them to retaliate with even more fury. But I was ready. They'd taken my marriage, tried to steal my children, and threatened my livelihood. I had nothing left to lose, and I was willing to fight until the bitter end. I returned home that night, exhausted but resolute. I knew the road ahead would be long and the fight far from over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a fighting chance. I would expose Tom and Laura for who they truly were, and I'd reclaim my life, no matter the cost. Just when I thought I'd seen the worst of Tom and Laura's tricks, they managed to stoop even lower. The very next day, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside were photographs of me at various moments over the past few months, photos taken without my knowledge. Some of them showed me with my kids, some at work, others were of me simply going about my day. But the implications were clear. I was being watched, every step I took meticulously recorded. Attached to the photos was a note scrawled in a familiar handwriting, Laura's. "This isn't over," it read. "Drop the countersuit and custody claims, or I'll make sure you lose everything you have left." Seeing her threat spelled out in her own handwriting drove a fresh wave of anger through me. The idea that she was actively trying to intimidate me, even after everything we'd been through, was almost unbelievable, but I knew better by now. Tom and Laura had a habit of taking things too far, and I couldn't let myself back down now. They'd already put me through hell, and I was done playing the victim in their twisted games. I immediately called Allison and told her about the photographs and the note. She insisted that we go to the police and file a report. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was criminal intimidation. It was clear that Laura had no intention of backing off, and we needed to document everything for our upcoming court date. The police took the report seriously, assigning an officer to review my case and investigate the surveillance. They assured me they would do what they could, but there was a catch. Unless they could directly tie Laura or Tom to the photographs, their hands were mostly tied. They advised me to stay vigilant and consider increasing security around my home. I took their advice and installed security cameras all over my property, even hiring a private security firm to monitor the footage around the clock. It felt ridiculous, like I was living in some kind of spy thriller, but the reality was much more sinister. My own wife, the woman I'd trusted, had turned on me so viciously that I couldn't even feel safe in my own home anymore. As the days passed, it became apparent that Laura's threats were more than just talk. She started showing up at events where she knew I'd be. I'd see her across the room, smirking at me, as if she were taunting me. She made a point to speak to people I knew, spinning lies and insinuating that I was unstable, that I was out for revenge. It didn't take long for the rumors to start circulating through our social circles. Friends who had once been supportive began to pull away, clearly influenced by Laura's manipulations. But the most painful blow came when I found out that Laura had involved our children in her twisted scheme. One evening, while I was putting them to bed, my son Max looked up at me with a tear-streaked face. "Daddy, why does Mommy say you don't love us anymore?" he asked, his voice trembling. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I pulled him into a hug, fighting back my own tears as I reassured him that I loved him and his sister more than anything. But the damage had already been done. Laura had planted seeds of doubt in their young minds, poisoning our relationship in a way that was almost impossible to fix. I was furious at her for using our children as pawns, for dragging them into a situation they should never have been a part of. I decided then and there that I couldn't keep letting her do this. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my kids. They deserved better than to be caught in the crossfire of their parents' feud. I reached out to the family therapist who had been working with us since the separation and arranged for extra sessions. I wanted to make sure they had a safe space to express their feelings away from Laura's manipulation. With the therapist's help, I began to rebuild my bond with the kids. I made a point to spend as much time with them as possible, reinforcing my love for them and reminding them that they could always come to me, no matter what. I knew it would be a long process, but I was committed to undoing the damage Laura had caused. Meanwhile, the investigation into Tom's finances began to yield some interesting results. Allison's legal team uncovered evidence that he had been siphoning money from his own business to fund Laura's extravagant lifestyle. It turned out that he had been using company funds to pay for vacations, gifts, and even some of the bribes he'd used to buy off people who might have exposed their affair. Armed with this information, we went back to court, this time with the upper hand. Addison presented the evidence to the judge, making it clear that Tom and Laura were not just two people having an affair. They were co-conspirators in a scheme that had cost me not only my marriage, but also my reputation and financial stability. The judge agreed to take the new evidence into consideration, and suddenly Tom's defamation case didn't seem so strong. But I knew better than to think this would be the end of it. Laura and Tom were too proud, too arrogant to walk away quietly. They had always believed themselves to be untouchable, and they weren't going to give up without a fight. I could see it in their eyes as we left the courtroom that day, a look of pure hatred directed squarely at me. They had lost this round, but I had no doubt they would come back even harder. I went home that night, exhausted but determined. I'd spent too long letting them control the narrative, too long letting their lies dictate the course of my life. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was finally taking back control. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my kids, for my business, and for the future that Tom and Laura had tried so hard to steal from me. As I lay awake that night, I realized that the battle was far from over. There would be more court dates, more lies, and likely more threats. But I was ready. I'd come this far, and I wasn't about to back down now. They had tried to break me, but they'd only made me stronger. And I was going to make sure they lived to regret every single choice they had made. As the legal battles wore on, it became clear that Laura and Tom's desperation was reaching new heights. They began to escalate their efforts, dragging my name through the mud publicly. They used social media as a weapon, posting twisted versions of events, painting me as a vindictive, bitter ex trying to ruin their lives. Laura went as far as to post photos of our kids, crafting a narrative of a heartbroken mother fighting to protect her children from a tyrannical father. The accusations started affecting my business. I lost clients who believed the lies they were seeing online. My reputation was taking a hit, and my mental state was fraying. The stress was unimaginable, but I knew I couldn't give up now. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting to protect my kids from the fallout of Laura's relentless campaign of deceit. In a desperate move, Tom and Laura began targeting my family. One day, my mother called me in tears, saying that Laura had shown up at her house, accusing her of raising a monster. It was clear that they were trying to isolate me from my support system, hoping that I'd fold under the pressure. But instead of feeling defeated, their actions only fueled my resolve. They were exposing themselves for the manipulators they truly were, and I was determined to hold them accountable. At our next court date, things took an unexpected turn. Laura had been pushing for sole custody, claiming that I was an unfit father, but our family therapist, who had been observing and documenting our interactions with the children, provided a damning testimony. She outlined Laura's toxic influence on the kids, detailing instances where Laura had manipulated them to suit her narrative. The therapist testified that the children expressed fear and confusion, often struggling to understand why their mother was speaking so poorly of their father. The judge was visibly disturbed by the therapist's account. He called Laura's actions despicable and emphasized that using children as pawns in a custody battle was not only harmful but deeply unethical. For the first time, Laura and Tom looked visibly shaken. It was clear they hadn't expected their tactics to backfire so spectacularly. Seeing the tide turn in my favor, Allison ramped up our strategy. She introduced evidence we had collected from the private investigator, emails between Laura and Tom discussing their plans to manipulate the children, details about the money Tom had embezzled to support their lifestyle, and messages where they openly mocked my attempts to fight back. The courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed the evidence, his face growing darker with each passing minute. In a decisive moment, the judge ruled that Laura's actions were grounds for a custody adjustment. I was awarded primary custody of the kids, with Laura receiving supervised visitation. Additionally, the judge ordered an immediate freeze on Tom and Laura's assets, pending further investigation into their finances. It was a stunning blow to them, and I could see the panic in their eyes as they processed the reality of their crumbling scheme. But even with these victories, I knew it wasn't over. Laura and Tom's animosity only grew, and they weren't about to let go easily. A few days after the court ruling, I received a chilling message from Tom. He hinted that if I didn't back off, there would be consequences. It was a blatant threat, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I took the message to the police, and they agreed to increase patrols around my home. I also enlisted the help of a personal security firm to ensure my family's safety. It was exhausting, living with the constant threat of retaliation, but I knew I had to stay vigilant. Tom and Laura were like cornered animals, and there was no telling how far they would go. One evening, as I was tucking my kids into bed, my daughter looked up at me with wide eyes and asked, "Daddy, are we safe?" Her question cut through me like a knife. I hugged her tightly, promising her that I would do whatever it took to keep her and her brother safe. It was a promise I intended to keep, no matter the cost. The final blow came when Allison managed to uncover an old incident from Tom's past, a domestic violence charge that had been quietly settled out of court. We brought this information to the judge, arguing that it showed a pattern of abusive behavior that made him unfit to be around the children. The judge agreed, and Tom was ordered to stay away from my kids indefinitely. With the court battles finally behind me, I began the process of rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. The scars of Laura's betrayal and Tom's threats would take a long time to heal, but I found strength in my children, in the knowledge that I had fought for them and won. I also took comfort in knowing that Laura and Tom's lives were unraveling. Their assets were frozen, their reputations tarnished, and they were now facing a mountain of legal fees that neither of them could afford. In the end, I realized that this fight had made me stronger. I had survived their lies, their manipulation, and their threats. I had stood my ground and protected my children from the toxic influence of two people who had tried to destroy everything I held dear. It was a hard-fought victory, but it was mine. As I looked toward the future, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was free from Laura's deceit, free from Tom's threats, and ready to focus on giving my kids the life they deserved. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the worst, and I had come out the other side stronger and more determined than ever. And as for Laura and Tom, I left them to deal with the wreckage of their own making. They had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they had only destroyed themselves. The weight of their own lies would haunt them for the rest of their lives, while I moved forward, free and unbroken.